Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Painted Porch Strategies Book Club. My name is Sierra, and I am joined by Amy and Rob. And we are back talking about The Little Prince. Here it is. Here's The Little Prince. Or if you're speaking in French, Le Petit Prince. And we have continued along the journey with The Little Prince through the universe. So we are starting with part 2. We are at chapter 14 through to the end, in case you are following along. And he is continuing on his journey to all these different planets. He's visiting a 5th, 6th, and then 7th planet. On the 5th planet, he runs into a street lamplighter. On the 6th, a geographer. And then finally to Earth. So guys, before we jump into these planets, tell me what you're thinking about the journey of the Little Prince so far.
I would say it's interesting the different planets and the different types of people that he's encountering on each one. They definitely are interesting characters, and I think he even says up until this point they're all kind of doing I'm going to paraphrase, like, nonsense work, that what they're not actually doing anything that is contributing in any meaningful way to their planet. They seem to be just going through the motions of whatever the task is that they're performing.
I really thought, why would you want to be an adult? Because every adult in this book on the 7 planets, although on Earth there isn't really many adults to find, but in the 6 planets where there are adults, they all seem dull.
It makes me think of the Lego movie where it's like business, numbers. Like that's what kept going through my head, was the little unicorn. It was like business, numbers. Here I am. I'm a working person. La-dee-da.
This is a big theme of The Little Prince. It's about this idea that the Little Prince, it's very little is important because he has that childlike quality. And all these other people he's meeting are grown-ups, are adults. And there's this overarching theme of that adults have lost something. They've lost a spark, or they've lost a sparkle, whether it's over the years or the, responsibilities that have been placed upon your shoulders, or just the crazy that has been indoctrinated into you. I don't know. But the Little Prince, through the Little Prince's eyes, none of this makes sense. When he gets to Earth, he lands, what he finds out to be is the middle of an African desert. There's not a lot around him. And he first meets a snake. And he thinks the snake, that's the only thing on the planet is sand and snake. And the snake says, actually, it's quite a big planet. There's a lot of people. There's just not a lot of people here. Just where you happen to land on this planet, it doesn't all look like this. And we learn that the snake has a very powerful venom. In fact, the Little Prince teases him and says, you don't look powerful to me. What can you even do? You're the size of a finger. And the snake, I shouldn't say he, they never give it a gender. The snake simply says, I have more power than a king has in its finger, because I can end life as you know it. I can kill you. So again, this idea of this power struggle comes up. And we just saw that last time with the king that is the only one on the planet, right? It's that power, or that perception of power. What else did you think about this whole interaction with the snake and the snake character?
That's a great question.
Well, I went to the Bible, right, because of the serpent, and it's one of the original stories you hear about the snake. So, that's where I thought there was a parallel there, although I wasn't quite sure exactly if the allegory was the same. But, it's that idea that, snakes slither, that they hide in the grass, or, you never really know what's around the corner, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, some of my research about this book, there are several different ties to biblical stories. So that's not far-fetched. The snake ends up being a really important part of the story later on. We kind of get introduced to the snake, and then we kind of forget about it, and then the snake comes back. But then as he continues on his way, he runs into this rose garden with, he says, about 5,000 roses. And all of a sudden, this huge moment of disillusionment happens, because the only other rose he's ever seen was that singular rose, his true love on his planet. And she told him, I am the only one in the universe. I'm beautiful. I am unique. And all of a sudden, there's just roses everywhere. So talk about what your reaction was when he finds this rose garden.
Well, I would say, I will say that there were times where I was reading this and I'm like, I know there's something more here. I know there's a deeper message, but I'm really struggling with trying to find what that message is. With the roses, I mean, my immediate thought was that you can get lost in what's special about something in your life if you are like inundated with it. It's like, be careful what you wish for kind of thing. Like Rob and I always joke, it's like, well, if you had ice cream every day, ice cream wouldn't be special to you. It's like, if you were surrounded by 5,000 roses, over time, they're all going to look the same, and you're going to lose your wonder and love of a rose, because you're overflowed with it, and so it loses its uniqueness, its specialness to you. Even
though each one has its own unique qualities and properties, I thought that was a lesson of adulthood for the Little Prince. And that if you are, let's say, an employee at a company and you're one of 5,000, you're basically the same, and you basically try to fit in, and there's a uniformity to being an adult on Earth. That's the way I took that.
How do you stand out?
Yes, exactly
as a
right.
Unique rose.
Well, yeah, and if you just looked at 5,000 roses, they might all look the same. But if you looked at them close up, you might go, oh. So if you went to a group of five, they went to a concert, and you had the ability to talk to 5,000 people. Okay, you're all there for the same concert, but each one of you is going to be there for a different reason, a different song, or a different connection you have, or because your spouse wanted to go, or whatever the case may be. So I thought it was the connection between his rose that said he was the only one versus, oh, wait, there's more. Now you get into that transition from childhood to adulthood of, oh, okay, when you're confronted with this idea when you're a child that the world is smaller, I guess, and then it gets bigger, and then you have to fit into the garden, so to speak, as most adults try to do.
Wow, you guys had some really interesting perspectives on that.
What did you think, Sierra?
I think the rose is such an I think the rose is probably the most complex relationship in this story. I think that the relationship the prince and the pilot have is actually the simplest, because I think actually of all the people he meets, I think he understands the pilot the most. And I know that the Little Prince is life-changing, life-altering for the pilot. So I think theirs is one of the simplest relationships. I think the most complicated relationship is between the Little Prince and the rose. And I think he feels conflicted about it, even at the end of the story. I think even when he chooses to go back to his planet, he doesn't know if the rose will be alive, and he doesn't really know exactly how he feels about it. So I think it is I think in the story, the context of the story, I think it is really talks about the complicatedness of a lot of relationships, whether it's in a agreed partnership or just a romance, is that it's always super complicated. He wants to protect the rose. He feels responsibility for the rose, but he also feels disillusioned by the rose, because he's wondering, did she lie to me? Did she know that she was one of lots of roses?
Right.
And then even just the visually looking at it is, yes, it smells good and has these beautiful flowers, but there's also thorns that poke you when you touch it. I mean, if that's not complicated relationship in a symbol, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
And isn't that humans, right?
Yeah,
There's a beauty
yeah.
in all of us, but we all have our thorns of protection that doesn't allow everyone to see our inner beauty because whatever reason.
Well, and we also can be petty, like the rose is very petty at times. You know, we all have those characteristics that can come out when we feel we're not being seen or heard or get the attention that we desire from others. Yeah.
Well, and then you also have that's complicated because she is implanted in the ground, just like the baobab roots, and she cannot move. She is virtually helpless. Whereas he has not only legs to walk around the planet, but he's traveling all over the universe. So they have a completely different set of ways that they can move and ways that they can operate. So again, that's speaking to like, we are not all the same. We are different, and we have to, you know, I thought about your course, Rob, with master communication is understanding how to communicate with somebody who operates in a different way or who goes off of a different type of communication.
Has different needs. Yeah.
Well, you think about when this book was written, Little Prince, it was right around World War II. So the world is at probably the most tumultuous ever, right? I mean, we had various periods of history, but this was the whole world in the modern context where we have the ability to fly across the world or take ships across the world. So I'm guessing that the author is so influenced by that, and there's some tie-in to something that he saw or thought about the world in that warring context where we all could be in the same garden if we really wanted to be. But we create these divisions in belief systems.
Planets.
Planets, exactly, that break apart the cohesion of a rose garden, right? So if humanity was a rose garden, we could just grow and we could just be. And we could get pruned every now and again, and that'd be fine. And we have our protections. But that disillusionment that you talked about, Sierra, all humans have that too. So you're a kid, your brain works a certain way, your brain gets developed, you start learning survival instincts. You don't even learn them, you have them, and they start impacting you more and more and more as you get older to create disillusionment about other people for various reasons, right? So, okay, let's imagine World War II. There's the German, right? There's the German rose garden. There's the American rose garden, the European rose garden. There's disillusionment between them all. So humans have the power to cut down the rose bush and start over. I don't know. I'm going real deep on this, but you know, I'm just trying to think of what the author is thinking about when he's writing this story.
Well, and that's part of it. It's to some extent you take away, you have your own interpretation of what the story is, but at the same time, like I said, I know there's a message in there. It's just sometimes it's a little tough to pinpoint, like where exactly was this going? What was the point of what you were saying here?
Brings up another interesting question, right? About, is this really a kid's book? Because it's pretty deep for a kid's book.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually why I love this book. And Amy, I'm sure you're wondering, why the heck did I pick this book? The reason why I picked this book is there is no right or wrong answer. This story can exist in however you perceive it to be. So you could read this story and take it very literally that this little prince really went to these planets and this really happened. Or you could take it as, well, what does that mean? And then, what does this mean to me? What do I feel from this? And that's exactly why when I was researching on this, I heard in multiple places, they said, you should read The Little Prince multiple times in your life. You should they were saying at least 3 times, at least once near the beginning of your life, somewhere near the end, and somewhere in the middle. Because they say every time you read this story, you will perceive the symbolism differently. You will perceive the story differently. Even what you believe the ending really happened, you will perceive it completely differently, not only person to person, but moment to moment in your lifetime. So that's why I picked it, because I love this. And there is no, I'm not the teacher grading a paper saying, yeah, that's what the rose means. Yeah. No, it's whatever you think the rose means, whatever your lesson was, that's what it means.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you need.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's what's so fascinating to me, is to bring it back to the Little Prince. The way I interpret the Little Prince is it's the pilot's inner child. So let's go back to survival instincts. So he lands his plane. He's in the middle of nowhere. And this kid shows up who's a little prince. So the symbolism of, okay, you're facing your own extinction potentially. Maybe that's when your inner child comes out and you're like, okay, we have to get creative. We have to explore solutions, because that's what kids do, right? Kids are creative. They're not bound by adult limits because they don't have limits. They don't know how difficult it is to fly to the moon, right? You're just like, oh, I just want to go to the moon. So in that situation, we're in the middle of a desert. You have no water, and you have 8 days of water. You got to figure out a solution in 8 days. You might have to tap into your inner child to find that solution. And that's what I think he was doing, the pilot. I think this was his little prince that had been buried deep inside a long time ago that resurfaced to show him the way.
Well, and he does say, the author, the pilot, he does make a comment, the little prince never seems to need to eat or drink or sleep. He never, he doesn't seem to have these needs. And is that just him? Is that the part of him that's just been on survival instinct and just ignoring these basic needs of food and water? Is this him pushing through these missions and just, keeping going without really stopping to take care of himself?
And towards the end, he does notice that the little prince needs water. It's just he hadn't, it took some time for that to manifest.
He talks about carrying the little prince and his body seeming like not very heavy and very weak and very weakened and very almost like small. And so there's that fragility there, or there's also that recognition, this has been beaten down. This person, or whatever this person is symbolizing, has been beaten down and needs some care. Something needs to happen here.
Yeah.
So speaking of, I don't want to spoil the ending of the book, but I have to, because we've talked about it. So the little prince has determined that it is almost the 1 year mark, or the full rotation of the earth since he had landed. And he believes that if he can be bitten by the snake, he asks the snake to bite him in order for him to change planes of existence and align back with his planet. So he is choosing to change his form. And he is somehow communicating this to the pilot. The pilot understands that he's going to be leaving. They have a conversation about this. And the little prince tells the pilot that every time he sees the stars, when he can no longer see the little prince, when you see the stars, picture the stars as laughing. Why do you think the little prince is telling him to think of the stars as laughing?
Deep questions.
You know how I do.
I used to be so good at this stuff.
Out of practice since English class in high school.
It's been a while. Well, I think it more just, the literal sense of it makes me think it's the perspective of what death and dying means, and how even though the little prince is going away from this plane of existence, instead of being sad, it's putting that thought, because he says, just remember that I will be on one of those stars that you see, and it could be any one of them. The possibilities are endless. You don't have to know which one is mine to know that I'm up there. And so I think through that, it just, from my lens, it was just taking that perspective of what does it mean to end, or to change, or to move. And it doesn't have to be something that you fear or are sad about, even though that, what is it? Don't cry because it's gone, smile because it happened. It's the kind of that premise, and being able to look and instead of looking up as a moment of sadness of, oh, he's gone, he's now somewhere else. It's being able to say, oh, he's up there somewhere laughing and having fun on his planet.
So remembrance, fond remembrance.
Yeah.
And there's a freedom in it, right? If you believe that anything happens after death, there's a freedom from all the experiences Little Prince learned in the 80 whatever pages of this book. Because presumably that stardust life, when you go return to our roots, is not really thinking or worrying about all those things that we think and worry about. So hence the laughter. Like, nope, it's all laughter up here. We're back to being kids. We're just laughing at everything.
Very interesting.
Apparently I'm way out on a limb here.
No, I like it. How is the pilot different from the other grown-ups to the Little Prince?
Well, I think you said it just a little bit ago. It's like they get each other. I think the pilot, he's not spending his time trying to explain the way things are to the Little Prince. I think, when the Little Prince even just asks him to draw something, he's like, okay, all right, great, sure. Instead of like, why do I have to draw this? What do you need it for? That's not practical. whatever the reason or meaning behind it is, he's like, okay, sure. And so I think they just get each other, and that they're both willing to accept each other as they are, and not trying to define either one in any way, just trying to be of help to one another in some way.
See, I just think it's a curiosity.
Well,
but that's, essentially what you're saying, right? I think the pilot was like, who is this guy? Who is this little guy? I want to ask him some questions. I want to talk to him. I want to be curious about him. Whereas none of the other adults really did. They just went about their way, and they didn't even barely notice him. Yeah. Like, nope, this is what I do. I'm an adult. I light the lamp. That's my story. And my planet goes around the sun every minute. So I have no breast. He's so self-absorbed that he doesn't even, hey, man, how you doing? Mm-hmm. And the pilot does.
I would agree. I think the pilot not only asks questions, but I think the pilot has had his eyes open to where he's trying to understand. Like, he even says how he asks more questions about things that the Little Prince didn't answer, which is interesting. I think it's something he actually learned from the Little Prince, because if you notice throughout the entire book, the Little Prince will keep re-asking a question until he either gets the answer or understands the answer. Here's that curiosity piece again. No matter who he's talking to, he will literally, like, one-track mind, which I have a 7-year-old, I recognize, continues to ask the same question again and again and again and again until he gets it. And so I think, like, this quality that the Little Prince does, now the pilot has picked up on this, because he still doesn't get about the rose. So he keeps asking the Little Prince, but I don't understand. Like, the rose, like, is she still there? Is the glass over her? Is it not? Has something eaten it? Is the sheep going to eat it? Like, I think that this is sort of like they have begun to teach each other. There's that blending, that learning, that growth mindset that the pilot has, that they're trying to say in the story. These other adults just do not. Right. This is me. It's what I do. I light the damn lamp.
Right. Yep.
But again, this is my perception reading this now. I actually read this book a few years ago, and I had a completely different perception of the same book. So if you've read this before, please read it again. Or if you're reading it for the first time now, put it aside on your bookshelf and plan to read it again at a different stage in your life and see what kind of comes up. So before we run out of time, I want to ask probably the most important question. A big overarching theme of this book is also about the most important things that are invisible to the eye, that cannot be seen. What do you think, or what were your feelings, or what were your ahas about this, about things that are invisible to the eye for you?
All right, I'll be the literal one here because that's logical Amy, rational Amy. So I liked the sentimentality of that message. I appreciated the beauty of the message to say that, because I even wrote it down, one sees clearly only with the heart. Anything essential is invisible to the eye. And I think things that maybe have the most meaning to you are things that you cannot see. You know, the beauty, the nuance, things like love or joy or happiness. Those are things that are not seen per se. But at the same time, the very rational, logical part of me, one thing, I know this is a children's story, but it's that part of the message is like, oh, all adults are silly. You know, all adults, they just spend their time doing nonsense stuff. It's the children that know what's best. It's like, well, yes, but you do still need adults to sometimes do those silly things. Now, not counting stars or lighting a lamp for no purpose, but there is still meaningful work that people can do that is tangible work, that is not all just plain curiosity. So that's where I like the overarching message of to get back into and to tap into your childlike sense of wonder and curiosity and appreciation, and the not knowing, the not seeing is part of the fun and the journey. But at the same time, I think there was also this message that like, oh, all adults, everything they do is pointless. And I'm like, no, not everything that they do is pointless. Maybe they just have to work on their balance a little bit. So,
okay.
But isn't that happening in your inner child? Because I think that's it's the warning that if you are in that situation where you're the lamplighter on whatever planet that was, the 5th planet maybe, where all the guy does is light the lamp every moment of the day. He's not happy.
No.
He just does it because that's what he's supposed to do.
Right.
And so many people, adults, get in the trap of what's supposed to happen and what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to live. And you're supposed to be one of 5,000 in the rose garden instead of being your one and only rose that's not afraid to be in your own or start your own garden. Because there is that uniformity in World War II, if you think about it, right, that created such a conflict because it was one uniform society in fascism and Nazism versus the freedom-loving world. And it created this massive clash where millions of people died and millions more suffered. So in the context of where this book comes from, adults led us astray. And instead of us going, hey, let's be little princes and be curious and tap into our inner children, that's the danger and the warning, is that when it gets too adult-like, millions of people can suffer. Maybe billions now, because there's 8 billion people in the world.
Wow.
Oh, you know, it's funny because I mean, for me, you know, I live and breathe politics and history. So most of where my brain goes is try to find the big historical allegory that ties into this somehow.
Yeah. Well, and we all process things through our own lens and through our own experience, which is why everybody who reads this book will have a different experience. So would you recommend reading this book to a person
out loud?
Would you tell other people, adults or children, would you tell other people to read this book? Or are you like, I don't know, it was a weird book, Sierra made me read it? Be honest. Would you recommend?
Just say it.
I'm not sure. Because my initial reaction, my initial thought was maybe if they're in the right mindset for it. So but what is that right mindset? I don't really know. So I think that because I mean, to be honest, when Rob and I, there are parts where we're just like, I gotta go look this up because I have no idea. I don't get it. I don't get the point. What were they trying to say here? So there were parts of frustration, or like I would say there were moments of I didn't really connect with that. Okay. And so I would say yes. I would say yes, read it, but at the same time, I guess the caveat would be for me, yes, read it, but recognize that you may need to be curious. You may need to do a little bit of exploration and a little bit of research to make sense of it, because there are times where it's not going to make sense.
Okay.
At least that's for me.
Okay.
I would recommend it to an adult over a kid. But maybe the kids will actually see it more plainly. I don't know. I don't have kids. We don't have kids. You have a 7-year-old. So I would be curious to know in a 7-year-old's mind what they get out of it.
Yeah.
Because I do think a lot of it is deep. I do think it is overly obtuse in some places, like Amy's thoughts. But I like the main meaning that I get out of it. The main reminder for me is, whereas little Robbie, what is he thinking about things? What is he curious about? And I think, fortunately for me, it's not that I've tapped into my inner child, but I've been able to sort of create a path where I've always wanted to go. So I've been like water in a sense, like, oh, I'm just going to go this way. And sometimes I'm going to wear down the rock eventually and stay right here.
Okay.
So I think that is probably why I got that message out of it. It's not that I tap into my inner child, but over the last 3 or 4 years, I realize my inner child tells me a lot of things. Like, my inner child is where a lot of those emotional, I don't want to call them scars, but that's essentially what they are, because your emotions that pop up in your scared moments or your insecure moments are moments that came from you where you learn that emotional response. Your central nervous system was like, oh, this is a warning. It's the same warning that I found that still comes up. That now I'm like, woo. Instead of going, oh shit, I'm scared. I'm like, oh, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. So having this book come in to me at this time, I'm like, oh, so that's where my mind goes that way. So if you're in that similar situation that I am, where you're real curious about your emotions and some of your thoughts that have been in your head for 40 years, this is that reminder to go, okay, spend some time with your inner child. Spend 8 days with your inner child if you can find it. Maybe you space it out and see what comes up. See what you're actually curious about, and see if you want to make a transition in your life to go back to your childhood curiosities.
Well, I can actually answer one of your questions. I did read this story out loud to my 7-year-old not quite a year ago. So he would have been 7, several months ago, before we did this book club. And his reaction was the polar opposite to Amy's. We finished the story and he took it as a literal story.
Yeah.
Oh, cool story, I think were his words. Cool story. So while we're reading it, what does this mean? Amy's looking up, what does this mean? What is this? What do they mean? He took it as just, this is a story. I think the only question he really asked me was, he said, well, how did he travel to all of those planets? And I said, well, I don't know. How do you think he did it? Mm-hmm. And then it went into like a space-time continuum thing. Okay, so that was a question, the how. But other than that, it was just, this is a story. Now, was there more happening? Possibly. I don't know. He didn't actually share that with me. But so I would actually argue that kids certainly could read this story, and they may just not see it in the same way. Don't be surprised if they just say, oh, he made a friend with a fox. He had a snake to bite him. He had a rose. It was complicated. Cool. Okay. Mm-hmm. Cool story. Cool journey. Right? But because kids are not always used to, think about any story that's a fable, that's a learning. it's usually told where here's the story, and then there's a cute little bow tied on the top. And what we learn from this story, children, is that you should blah, 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 blah. Never talk to strangers. Don't take candy. I don't know what. So they're often told what the lesson is. So if you don't tell them that there's a lesson, they either think, oh, it's just a story, or they make up in their own mind what the lesson is.
Right.
So that's why when we were discussing the symbolism, I say there is literally no wrong answer, because it's your perception. And this is where I think the main, as opposed to grown-ups suck, is allow perceptions to just be people's perceptions, not have the story have an official answer. There's no fact checking going on. Is allow people to have their experience and their understanding, knowing that it could be completely different from your own.
Yeah.
Which ties nicely back into the 5,000 Roses, doesn't it? Because if 5,000 people read this book, we might all look the same on the outside, but we're all going to have maybe a little bit of different coloration on the inner petals, or maybe one petal grows a little bit longer than the other, different interpretations of that.
Yeah.
Very insightful.
Yeah.
I like that. I think that's a good interpretation, Sierra.
Yeah.
So that was, I felt like, even though this from the exterior might not be a Stoic story, I feel like it ties a lot into the principles of Stoicism, as far as you can choose how to react. So you can choose how it is you react. Some people would say, oh, it was really sad when the prince died. Others might say it wasn't sad at all. It was his own choosing. It was him choosing his own fate. It was he was trying to get home. You know, there's a million different ways to look at it. So in one of the things I read, oh, don't read it to children because it's sad. My child didn't think it was sad at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was no tears. There was, no tears about the prince changing forms.
Right.
So it's allowing that perception to happen, knowing that dichotomy of control. The only thing you're in control of is the way you act and react to others.
And the reason Sierra brings that up is because that's what Painted Porch Strategies is founded on. Stoic principles. And I'll add this in because I do think there was a Stoic tie in there, because I do think Stoicism essentially has you manage your emotional child, if I could call it that. Not necessarily your inner child that's filled with wonder, but the child that has experienced certain things that made you scared or made you, question your self-esteem or whatever. That's what Stoicism is, and understanding that those emotions and thoughts you have tie back to your emotional child that you can be curious about.
Right.
And the more curious you get about it, the more you manage your state.
Yeah.
And the more you learn and grow, and hopefully, become a more virtuous person, or at least a more aware person of the type of person you want to be, intentionally, growing as a human.
Indeed.
Yep. Right on. Well, thank you, Sierra.
So, thank you so much. This has been The Little Prince, and I'm going to try not to butcher this too badly, by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, a French author and pilot. This is actually one of many books he wrote, but this is by far the most famous. It's been translated in every language. It is a classic. I hope that you will read it, and if you have comments about some of the things we're talking about, please join the conversation. And remember what I said, there is no wrong answer. This is just a story, and how you respond to it is your choice. We're not here to police the comments about whether you got the symbolism correct. There is no correct. So we are Painted Porch Strategies, and next month, can I say what our book is the next month? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Next month, we are going to be reading for the month of September. We're going to be reading Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. Here's this guy right here. And I hope you'll join us for that. If you missed any of our past book clubs, you can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and you can also find us on our website, onthepaintedporch.com.